What's going on, man?
Nothing much. Just here in the burg, just trying to stay alive, stay black and undead. Right
I
now, what's
think
good?
that I think that trying to stay alive before the pandemic, that was just like a thing that we said. Now it's actually like a factual thing. Like
Yeah, I mean,
it's like stepping outside.
the pandemic is one of those things that I hate when people say honorary black this and honorary black that, but I think that for the first time, some white people are starting to realize, oh shit, the air can actually kill you. And gravity, the atmosphere could actually kill you. And this is an existence that we just gotten used to with our entire existence. And now it's like, holy shit, yeah, this just stepping outside for a second could do that to
Well, but then as usual, we have the there's the atmosphere trying to kill us, but then there's everything else that was trying to kill us before.
you. Yeah.
So
Like, did you watch Lovecraft? Did you watch Lovecraft Country?
I didn't, man. I didn't.
Okay.
I was. My wife was watching it. I was knocked out.
Okay, because without spoilers for people who haven't seen it yet. I mean, it's about monsters. It's about Jim Crow, but not the Jim Crow South. It's about the North, racism in the North. And in that first premiere episode, you have these terrible monsters, and they did a great job with making these monsters as ugly and as scary with all the teeth and eyes as possible. And they're diesel. It's like a bunch of Kimbo slices, but with 1,000 teeth and eyes over their backs and heads. And the most scary thing is still the racists. Still the racist cops. It's still the racist town people. The monsters are just like, okay, well, these are just some monsters. But the real monsters in the premiere are the racists.
So it's sort of like an accidental metaphor for right now, because I'm sure they conceived it and filmed it all before they knew that this was going to happen.
So I was reading your piece in the New Yorker about the barbershop. And
that still connects with your piece from your book.
So, and I wanted to ask you, I was in the shop once a week before COVID, and I don't shave, I don't do nothing, so I get all of my everything at the barbershop, my beard, my hair, and as you can see, I'm out here looking like Chewbacca right now. At the barbershop in so long. And so what is it that you miss most about I'm assuming you're not going to barbershops right now either.
No, I haven't been since the pandemic started.
So what is it about the shop that you miss most?
Well, I had my barber was this so I moved out to Annapolis from where I was living in Silver Spring, and I had a real good barbershop in Silver Spring, and my story was based on the female barber who was cutting my hair, and I really liked how she cut my hair and how she cut my son's hair. Then we got up here, and it was kind of like, I'm not driving an hour to Silver Spring to get my hair cut. So we found there's one black barbershop out here, but the rules. The old guy, you probably should skip the old guy, and the guy who doesn't have anybody in their seat, and I broke the rules. and my son, he was about 7, right? And so he's about 7, and at the end of the cut, I was he fucked up my son's hair. He fucked up my hair, and I was trying to reassure. I was like, you like the cut, right? He's like, no, not really. So so I found so eventually I found a black barber at the mall, and he was. I'm sorry.
At the mall, a barbershop.
Yeah, I went to one of these corporate mall barbers.
Oh wow.
And,
okay.
Yeah. And it was it didn't have the environment that, it didn't have the black barbershop environment. It was but he was good. And then one day he quit. And I was searching Google and I found him on Google. It's a long answer to your question. And I found his Instagram and saw he opened up his shop. And so what I miss is seeing him build up his business. You know, I was real proud of him. He's a young dude. He has this like real alternative demeanor. You know, he doesn't look like somebody you would usually see. Like no barber I've ever seen. You know, he doesn't have like he has a perm. He's all into samurai stuff. He has a samurai harness that he wears, and it's different.
Barber, okay.
Yeah, he's a black samurai barber, and it's different. And I love seeing him build up his business and all the things that he's trying, all the different little gimmicks and tricks that he's trying to get people in the shop. And I hope that he makes it throughout this. You know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, barbershops, and it's funny that you bring up your the best barber that you've had recently was the woman who was
right. She was great.
And there's this almost like this inverted or reverse affirmative action that happens within like the black barbershop where if they're, you know, because there's misogyny, there's sexism, this baked into those interactions. So if you have a woman that is in the shop, she's either the owner or she's
was she the best barber there?
She's not going to be like the I don't know. She's not going to be the DJ Augustine of the barbershop. She's not going to be like the journeyman who just happened to get a chair somewhere. She's going to be the star if she's in the shop. And the same thing even is for white barbers at black barbershops. Like if there's a white boy working in the black barbershop, you know that his skills are tight because they're not going to just let him rock if he's some shitty barber. He's not going to get the legacy chair. There are no legacy chairs for white barbers in black barbershops.
So what are you missing about it?
So there's the moment. There's like that little space. Okay, so after the cut is done, right? And so there's the whole theatrical situation with the cape removal and the cape removed. They take the neck guard off and then repurpose the neck guard as like the peroxide delivery device where they, do your face, whatever, get the talcum, boom, 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 all that.
It's a ceremony.
Yeah. But then that first moment, you look in the mirror. That first moment, either you're handed a mirror or you turn around and you see, you finally see, I'm a new man. You know, and that first moment when you see yourself after the cut, after this entire process, after the theater and and the majesty and the pomp and the circumstance, and you actually see, this is how I look right now. I'm feeling this. And I don't know if there's a moment, at least for me, where I ever feel better about myself. Like the very first moment when I'm looking in the mirror, I don't think there's no other moment where my self-esteem is higher than that particular moment. And then, you walk, and then, you pay the barber, you say, you give the pound to him and whoever else is that that's in there, and then you leave, and then you're back into the rest of the world.
In 24 to 48 hours, you are the man.
Yeah.
You're the man in 24 to 48 hours.
But even getting back into the rest of the world, even leaving the shop, although there is now people are going to see me with this new cut. I'm Idris motherfucking Elba right now. Even that is flattened a little bit by leaving the safety of the shop.
Mm-hmm.
Though the shops ain't always safe, but leaving the shop and like, oh shit, I'm back in the world now. I'm back in America now. My Idris, I got my Idris, happening right now, but I'm still in America. And so I have a white barber.
Oh yeah,
And
okay.
he's the white boy in the black barbershop. And I found him because I'd had the same barber for 15 years. My man, his name was Andre. He worked at this shop in East Liberty neighborhood in Pittsburgh, called East Liberty Cuts, and it was his shop. And I started going to him, I think when I was like 18 or 19 years old, because my friend went to a barber in that shop, and I was just with him one day. We were about to go hoop. I needed a cut. I rolled with him, and I was like, you know what? I'll get a cut in this shop or whatever. And he had an open chair, and I've been going to him for, up until I was 34, 35 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He became a good friend, and not like the sort of friend that you invite over to game night or barbecue, but the sort of dude that you just look forward to seeing every week. And you chop it up, talk about his kids, we talk about school. We used to argue about LeBron and random as fuck sports things, but he was a bad barber.
And you can't leave your bad barber.
He was objectively bad at cutting hair because he would be so consistent and he would be so distracted, where he would start a cut, then he would go like play a number, and I'd be sitting in a chair for like 15 minutes waiting for this nigga to come back, or he would be eating, offer me fries or offer me a slice of the pizza. Like, nigga, just finish out. I can get food. I didn't come here for food. I came here to get a haircut. And so one side, like he'd do one side, then he'd go off and, be on the phone and then come back and do the other side. And then I would come home and my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, would be like, yo, I know you love this barber, but something, yeah, he making your head look like an Etch-a-Sketch right now. Something has to give. And so I finally was like, you know what? I need to find a new shop. And so there was a new shop that opened like 2 blocks away from the shop I went to. And I just rolled up in there one day. It already was an upgrade. Like the shop was nicer. The barbers all looked like they were doing on point shit. And the person who asked me if I needed help was the one white boy who was in there. So I'm not going to be racist and be like, you white. I'm good. So I went, it's like, fuck, I guess this is his fate right here. So I went and sat in his chair, and he's been my barber since. And this was 2000 and I think 2014 or 15.
Okay.
And he's been my barber since then. So we got these hair stories, man. I mean, it's barbershop is, a hollowed and also deeply problematic place, and it just
right. Right. I mean, and I was in my first book. I wrote, because what you're talking about with the barber decline. I was just finding that's just like inevitable. The greatest barber is with time is just gonna decline. They're either just gonna stop giving a fuck, or their skills just dissipate. And so with my first book, I was kind of skeptical about writing about it because it felt like a cliched thing to write about in Black literature, but I couldn't not write about it. It just felt like it was such a big part of our lives. It's like I look at my son, and his hair is so important to him, and he's 9, and it's like I don't even know how he got like that. It's like it was something innate. It's like not something I pushed. And so, I had thought about this, sort of metaphor for that decline, it's almost like a curse. And so that story is almost a sequel to that. That story in the New Yorker is a sequel to the story in my first book. And I think with that one, I just sort of just got deeper into thinking about, we talk about the problematic aspects of it. With the first one, I was thinking of all the fucked up things that I was that I was, that I heard as a young man growing up, and this was the 80s. So it was like, it's just different. It's just like, you go into the barbershop and, my barber had all these nasty pictures on the wall. And it's just like, I'm thinking like, there's no way I'll bring my son in 2000. We're different in 2020, right? I wouldn't take my son to a barber with nasty pictures on the wall and penthouse on the table. And then just like a lot of the conversations, but there were, the conversations which inevitably turned oftentimes to the proper ways to beat children. And it's a lot of stuff that that you go in there and you soak in, but then there's all the camaraderie and the brotherhood, and it's just it's rife to write about, whether you're doing it in memoir, as you did it, and I feel like those stories, there's just so many things that overlap in our stories.
Yeah, and the barbershop, and like you were saying, it does feel cliche sometimes. Okay, black male writing. Okay, you're gonna write about the barbershop. Black male show. I mean, Atlanta had a whole show devoted to a barber. Blackish just had shows devoted to a barbershop. In fact, the Blackish show that was devoted to barbershop, I think, I will take this to my grave, but I believe that someone in the writer's room read something that I wrote about the barber. Based that episode on. But the thing is, we have so many overlapping experiences and so many similar experiences. But I was just watching like, holy shit, this is literally exactly what I wrote. But I know that I'm not singular either.
You're right.
My experience it's not quite universal, but I'm not the only one. But the part about the cliche about the barbershop that actually I do want to challenge is the idea that, and you see this repeated very often, is that this is like where the most valuable black male thought exists, and this is this is if you want to know how black men really feel, how black men really think, and if you want to see black male intellectualism, you need to go to the barbershop. Sometimes, maybe, sometimes, but a lot of those barbershop combos need to stay in the barbershop and don't need to leave the barbershop at all, because, as you were saying, you're getting tips on how to beat children. Sometimes you could be getting tips on how to be more homophobic or more transphobic or more misogynistic, and that's a part of it too. And that's one of those things where, when I was a young man, or teenager, young man, listening to those things, I knew that it was wrong, but I didn't feel grown enough to challenge these grown men talking about this stuff. But then I'm grown enough to challenge, and it doesn't. And in the shop that I go to now, that just doesn't happen as much. But sometimes there might be another client who's in a chair and having a conversation. You hear a thing, and it's like, do I challenge it right now, or do I just, I'm getting my cut, I'm on my phone, I'm not even paying attention? Like, what is the obligation? Do you feel obligated if you're in that space now, knowing, and you're in a space where you know better and you're able to articulate exactly what the right thing is? Do you feel compelled to actually make that challenge in the shop?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I think that we all know the right thing to do is to speak up, but a lot of times it's just it's like why what is the point, right? A lot of the thought is it's so deeply ingrained, and it's so ridiculous. Like I remember one time that a guy was talking about how if his daughter talked back, I'm gonna do him like Marvin Gaye's dad did him, and everybody just got quiet after that, because it's just such a ridiculous thing to say. There's no there's no cause to murder your child, right? We all agree Marvin Gaye's dad was wrong, no, right? So so sometimes it's just like, it's performative, and it's like this guy's not gonna murder his child. This guy's speaking from bravado. But a lot of times, it's yeah. I mean, I think that I think there are moments where you participate in the debate, and there are moments where you say, this is bravado, this is stupid. There's no reason for me to jump into it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that too, and I think that in that situation that you mentioned, that guy seemed to be clearly just like reaching for a cosign, like reaching for, knowing that what he said was some fuck shit, but reaching for
and he didn't get it.
And yeah, getting that silence sometimes is worse than actually getting a vocal rebuke. It's like, holy shit, crooked.
Our silence was a commentary. I think our silence was a commentary. Maybe that's a cop out, and maybe we should all say, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Don't say some shit like that anymore. But I think our silence was a commentary at that moment.
Yeah, and that it's tricky because, again, I mean, sometimes the silence can be a response, and sometimes it's like, well, yeah, I should have said something. I need to say something. And sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And I wish that there was a more, I guess, like a more of a science to it. It's like, okay, if it crosses this certain line, then this is when you say a thing.
Right.
But that just doesn't exist. And yeah, and there have been times.
If I'm ready and able, there's often we have often this you often hear this conspiratorial thought, which I hear it, and I don't feel like going into. I'm just not. Oftentimes, I know it's bullshit, but oftentimes it's like I'm not. I don't have all the. I don't have the resources right now, and it's and I don't. I just rather not engage with your conspiratorial thought. A lot of times I need to think about it and figure out what's the best way to address this. And at that moment, it's just it's not worth it.
Yeah, I feel like, in just thinking about this right now, I am more prone to challenge when I know that I have the words, when I know that
right.
I can articulate exactly why. Yeah, that's wrong. This is why. this is why it's wrong. Okay, like someone saying like this class, like I know, just get on the fucking plane.
But it's like you said, your shop is a little different. It feels like we've moved into another era, and I don't. My shop is a little different, but even when I was going to to a traditional shop, it was I didn't hear a lot of stuff that I wanted to get up and challenge. I don't know if I would sit still for some of the homophobia nowadays. But I didn't hear it a lot.
And that's an important point, because there are so many shops, and yeah, my son is 19 months old. And when I take him to a shop, finally, I'm definitely not taking him to a shop that, it's motherfuck this, bitch that.
Oh, right. Right.
No, I'm not taking my son there. I'm not taking my daughter there. Not having my wife walk into that shop. And the shop that I currently go to isn't that. In fact, I have to say I've been mostly fortunate in terms of the shops I've been at, and the conversation and the tenor and the mood of the shop. Now, when I was in school in Buffalo, I went to a shop there that I felt like I was in New Jack City each time I got a cut like that. I felt like that was a front for everything.
Yeah.
A front for every business possible. That shop was a front for it. But
I was in upstate New York. I was in upstate New York as well, and the barber there, it was really interesting because the level of conversation was higher because the barber, he said he had 4 degrees, and he was just listening to him. It was like his conversation reflected the fact that he had 4 degrees. It was just on a higher level, and it sort of like elevated everyone else. It was.
So just I'm curious too. Just pivoting a little bit from the barbershop. How has COVID just impacted your work, and not just in terms of the way you find space to work, but in terms of the work itself? Like, are you finding yourself incorporating any aspects of the last 5 or 6 months into the shit that you're doing now?
Yeah. I watched some other conversations with you, and I know that you're looking to see how we've adjusted, right? As writers, I think at first, I've been working on this novel for a long time, and it's really hard. I've been working on this sort of form of fashion for a very long time in my head, and I finally put pen to paper. But when everything happened and everything stopped, I felt like I needed to address it, and I dropped my I dropped my novel that I've been working on. I started working on something else. I started working on something else that incorporated and addressed what was going on in the world outside, and as well internally, because COVID forced on me a kind of solitude that you're just alone with yourself, and it's comical way to say it is you're like that Spider-Man meme. You're just playing to yourself, but less comically, it's like you're walking through these corridors, and it's like you're Bruce Lee, and there's something chasing you, and it's like you're walking through the corridor, all these mirrors, and there's the enemy chasing. You don't know where it is because all you can see is yourself. So I started trying to incorporate, but what I realized was that everything is changing so rapidly. I started writing it, and the cops murdered George Floyd, and then everyone's on the street in a way that we haven't been, and just every single day something new happens, and it was satirical, but the world was outpacing the satire. You get the president telling us to drink bleach, and it's like, how the fuck am I supposed to compete with that? Yeah. So what I realized is that I need to observe, the idea, the basic structure, the characters, I think they'll be there, and I think some of the ideas, they'll be there, but I need to really sit around and observe. So I went back to my original project, and I'm just working on that slowly. I think a lot of it was trying to escape from a project that was sort of kicking my ass. But then I went to another project that's kicking my ass, and I'm even less prepared for it because I hadn't been working on it.
Is there such a thing as a project that's not kicking your, like, is there an unasked kick project? Does that even exist?
Right. But I wrote through this whole period. The only thing I finished was a short story, and I wrote that, and it kicked my ass, but in a different way, and that it came out. It's a long story, but it came out from beginning to end with, I had to revise it, of course, but it sort of flowed from me. And it was just a pure joy to write, and I haven't really been able to capture that again. Just like the situation outside, the situation with my writing, it just changes on a daily basis. Right? I don't know. It's just like, some days I wake up and I'm just like, damn, we're still in this shit and I can't write because I'm just, I'm feeling this anxiety, I'm feeling this depression. Contrary to what people who don't have anxiety, don't deal with anxiety and depression, it's not good for your art, right? It's something that I would rather not deal with. So yeah, so it changes. It's changing on a daily basis. What
Yeah,
about you?
what I realize is how much I need other people, and
Mm,
I'm a pretty like severe introvert naturally, and I think like if you'd have asked me a year ago or told me a year ago, it's like, you know what, there's going to be a pandemic where you're going to be forced to be in a house, be away from people for months at a time, I would have assumed that, okay, well, at the very least, I'll be able to get a lot of work done. Now we have my wife and my kids are in the house, and I would have to find space away, particularly away from the kids, which my wife, fortunately, helps provide for me, in order to
hmm
work. I thought that, what, if I were able to get that space in our house to work, then this sort of situation would be a boon for me. But my writing process requires the outside world. I need to go to the coffee shop and just sit and watch people. One of my favorite places to work was the Ace Hotel in Pittsburgh, where I would just sit at a table. I would eat, I would drink, I would sit there. Sometimes sometimes I'd be there at night, and there'd be parties and shit happening and whatever. And this provided like a valuable white noise for me, where I'd be able
hmm
to sit down and work. And having that removed, and just having to really sit with myself and sit with all this anxiety and all of this neurose, all these neuroses, all of that, and not be able to observe and not be able to project and just have to sit with myself has been very difficult.
mm,
And it also happens to be a period where I'm getting a lot of opportunities. A lot of opportunities that I have been working for and wanting to get for 5-6 years, and a lot of them are happening like literally right now. But it just happens to be a time when I don't have
mm,
the bandwidth that I'm used to having, in terms of just being able to create and being able to really, devote the sort of attention and care and rigor to each project that it deserves. And so I'm fearful that whenever this ends, year from now or whatever, hopefully, and that the work that I'm working on right now sees, it exists in the world, I'm fearful that that work is going to be 80% of what I could do
mm.
under normal circumstances. 87%, 72%, instead of it being like, oh yeah, this is, like it or not, this was the best that I could have possibly done with this thing. And I'm fearful that I'm not giving these things my best anymore. And
Mm.
that is, that's definitely a COVID related fear. But the thing is, I guess the um the scale on which best is measured shifts. I think because, maybe I need to give myself more grace, because perhaps the best that I do right now is just the best that I could do. Like
hmm
I don't judge myself based on 6 months ago, because it's not
Right.
six, it's now. And this best is the best. It might not be the 6 months ago best, but maybe a year from now, that best is different than this best. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't
Well,
know. And
you know what?
I'm still
No,
trying to make sense of this all.
that makes a lot of sense. I think we have to afford ourselves grace. I think which I'm not very good at. I think at the beginning everyone was talking about, oh, Shakespeare wrote the Tempest, and I forgot what else, but there were other works that everyone was saying were written during a play, and so we don't have to do that. And what I decided this week, is that I'm just gonna write a sentence every single day, um, and and if I write that sentence, if I write more, that's great. But I just gotta write that sentence, and that's fine. I've there were there are times, there are two particular stories that I've written, one in my first book and one in a book that's not published, but trust me, it's a great story. The book will never be published, but it's a great story. I wrote word by word, right?
Why
It'll be published in a different form eventually. It was gonna be my first book, but the publishing company never really did anything with it, and then it went under. And so I'm just not comfortable with it. It was written by a different person, and I think I'm gonna go back. It's called Wolf Tickets, and a lot of the stories on it are online. And I'm gonna go back to it one day and totally rewrite it. But I wrote that story, the last story in Wolf Tickets and the last story in my first book. I wrote them word by word. It was, some days I'd just be listing words, and they turned out great because of that. Right now it's like I'm not gonna. If I don't have the bandwidth to sit down and write, and write 1,000 words, that's gonna happen again at some point. But I'm just gonna write a sentence, and I wrote a great sentence, on Sunday. I wrote an okay sentence yesterday, 2 okay sentences yesterday. And that's fine. It's gonna get finished that way. And I'm saying it like this, like I'm saying it, all zen. That's not how I feel inside a lot of times, but it's a lot of times like I only wrote a sentence, fuck. But I think I'm in the process of affording myself a little bit more grace.
Well, that's what that is. That's what that is. Where you almost had to step outside yourself to give yourself, because it exists. Grace exists, functionally as this entity that doesn't exist within you. You have to remove yourself from yourself and give yourself a perspective that you, in the moment, just don't have.
Right.
Because if you had it, then there wouldn't be the need for grace. So it's this, I don't know, it's very just nebulous process where you have to kind of escape yourself and look at yourself and then grant yourself this thing that you wouldn't be able to give yourself unless you had removed yourself from yourself. I feel like I'm talking circles. Right. But that's how it works. Because again, when you're in the moment, when you're in the trenches, when you are dealing with whatever the anxieties and neuroses and self-consciousnesses and vulnerabilities, you just can't give yourself that grace.
Right.
So you have to be almost a separate you to be able to tell yourself, like, hey, yes, you feel this way, you're going through this thing, but you also deserve to be a little bit kinder to yourself right now.
Right.
And it's not just that you deserve it, you require it in order to be able to move forward. So here's this.
Right. I mean, you gotta remember, this is a generational thing. It's like so many people live their entire lives and never experienced this. So of course it's gonna be different. Of course it's gonna throw us off. And what I realized is that when this is over, I stockpiled ideas. I stockpiled a lot of stuff that I just sort of feel like at a certain point the dam's gonna burst, and everything's gonna flood. But right now it's gotta rebuild. It's like the sports teams when they there's a year where they know they're not going to the playoffs. It's a rebuilding year,
They tank. They start. So you're saying you tanking right now? You tanking for number 1 draft pick?
Exactly.
Speaking of that, have you been watching the bubble games, the NBA bubble games?
Yo, man, I'm not a sports guy. I know I just use a sports metaphor, but I'm not a sports dude.
Okay.
I follow the news events though, and LeBron's hairline over the years.
Well, with the NBA, it's so fascinating because there are so many storylines outside of what actually happens on the court that happen during a game, and so they just completed a very successful experiment where they went into this bubble at Disney.
At Disney, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. And I thought that it was going to be a disaster. Like I thought, like when they were thinking this up, I thought that it was going to. I felt like the person in the first 15 minutes of the horror movie, where you're riding through like the scenic route and everything looks great, and then you like goes to some gas station and there's like some creepy guy in there who just says something really cryptic about the woods you're about to drive through. But the people are like, oh, that's just some weird guy. But I don't care about we're just going to drive through these woods. And I felt like we were at that point. It's like, holy shit, we're about to drive through these woods. But I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised that it hasn't been the horror show that I assumed it was going to be. That I figured
even with the hologram fans.
You know what? All of that. So that's just a part of the NBA's just bizarre absurdity. The hologram fans, the Black Lives Matter slogans on the jersey, which is terrible, which is like the worst decision that has ever been made. And I've seen glitter, so I've seen bad decisions, but this is a terrible, awful decision to put like these random slogans. Like some people will have Black Lives Matter, other people's will have economic injustice. There's a white player, Joe Ingles, for the Utah Jazz who has ally the back of his jersey. I mean, like how absurd and ridiculous is this going to be? But
thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Joe. So that part right there, it's dumb. There's no defending it. But the actual basketball playing,
the gameplay,
and the fact that there hasn't been an outbreak, and that's I guess, and that thing, the fact that there hasn't been an outbreak, and yes, there's a lot of money behind this, and there's a lot of incentive, financial incentive to keep this as sterile as possible, but it just shows that is possible.
There's a way forward, yeah.
And it is possible, even during this pandemic, to slow everything down, to not just flatten the curve, but end it. If you have testing, if you have everyone on the same page, if you have people conscientious enough to think outside of themselves, this can actually happen. We can actually put a stop to this. If I hate being a kumbaya ass nigga. I've never been that person. I think unity for the sake of unity is some fuck shit. There's some bullshit. Like, I don't want to unify with you if you are a person who I would, I don't want to unify with everyone. I don't need.
I'm not holding hands with the Klan.
Yeah, but I think in this instance, a collective unification towards this common enemy would be so simple and wouldn't even need to last that long. We just need to last for 5 or 6 weeks, and America just can't do that. We
saw a headline.
We just aren't built for that.
I saw a headline in Wuhan. They haven't had a case, and they're out in the streets all together again.
They have a pool party. I just saw that they had a pool party.
Right.
and it were the place where supposedly the disease came from.
Right. And it's shameful that we're holed up in our houses.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of stuff that it's just there's an absurdity, right? And it's shit is dark, right? But in that dark, right? I just want to pivot a little bit, because it makes me think about in your work. I want you to talk about how you use humor, because you mean I laughed out loud, right? Throughout your book, and a lot of times, sometimes you're writing about things that aren't funny. You know what I'm saying? You're like your mother, taking a stray bullet. You even put a joke in about that, and I know at that moment that shit wasn't funny, but I really like what you do with humor. I want to talk about how that works in your work.
Well, and the thing is, I can and will say the same thing for your work. I was watching it was either watching or reading an interview with Michelle Cole, and I've been obsessed with her. Have you watched I May Destroy You?
I just watched right before we spoke. I was just watching the last episode.
Okay, incredible. And I'm obsessed with her, with that show, with the fact that she created this, that she wrote something like 100 and something versions of the script before she settled on it. Yeah, I mean, it's when you watch that show and you listen to her talk about the creative process, it's magic. Like it's literal like magic. And one thing that she said in one of the interviews, because a person was asking her, okay, how do you find levity and the humor in this really dark subject matter? And her response was that I just don't remove it. And I think that's the same, with my approach, where all of these situations, even the terrible, the awful, the tragic, there is some humor there sometimes. There is some levity there sometimes. There is some absurdity and ridiculousness there sometimes. And I just choose not to remove it. I choose to leave it in there because it's a part of the story. And also it's a part of how I tell stories. Like I can't tell stories without the humor. Now there are parts of the book, there are parts of other things I've written that where humor just they're just I made the choice to remove it. I made the choice to remove it, or it just doesn't exist. Or it just didn't exist and I just wrote a straight, sober, serious piece. And that happens sometimes, but mostly the humor isn't injected. The humor is just already there, and I just find a way to articulate it in a way that isn't egregious. Hopefully not egregious. Hopefully not distracting. And so I did a book talk yesterday with it was Memoir Monday, and I did and someone asked one of those.
Shit, that was yesterday.
Yeah,
I just saw it on Facebook, and I was like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna watch that."
It was last night, and I guess whenever people will be watching this, we're recording this April or August 18th. So the event that I'm talking about happened August 17th, Monday, August 17th. But
and Facebook just told me about it today.
Facebook is racist. Facebook is racist. Facebook, yeah. But what was I saying? Oh, I think that there are people who come to my work, and particularly white people, who come to my work sometimes and know that it is dealing with these very heavy topics of race, racism, misogyny, patriarchy, masculinity, performance, economic anxiety, and anticipate a certain sort of book or a certain sort of work. And while I love Ibram, and How to Be an Anti-Racist, and Ta-Nehisi and Ijoma, and all the people who are doing the really robust anti-racist work, my work isn't that. This isn't this isn't going to be a guide this isn't going to be a guide for white people on how to be better white people. This isn't going to be centered always, centered in trauma or centered in a very sober reaction to the trauma. In the first 3 or 4 pages of my intro, I have an entire page devoted to the connection between masturbation and prayer. Okay, and it's this is the sort of book that you're getting from me. And again, I need humor is just an essential part of how I see the world and how I tell stories, how I've been able to find catharsis, not just on the page, but in quote unquote real life. Having jokes in my head, having observations in my head, getting an opportunity to finally write them down. And so, yeah, the humor, it's there and will always be there with my work and with your work. I mean, and I'm referencing specifically the New Yorker piece. And what was the title of it again?
Shape Ups and Delilahs.
And I was reading it, and one, how magic it is. Like, some of the shit that happens is it felt like I was reading a screenplay from Atlanta, where it exists. It exists. It could have happened. It could be real, but it's so absurd. It's so ridiculous. Like, this could never ever happen in real life. But it's still based and still centered in reality. But just the humor weaving through it, and you have this these very dark backdrops with death, incarceration, abuse. But humor is still a part of that story. And I think for us, for Black people who are telling stories, who are telling American stories, humor is radical.
Yeah.
It's a radical act to be able to exist this way and feel all of this racism, all this oppression, all of the measures America takes to kill us, and still be able to create things that look all the oppression, that look all the bias, that look all of the hate in the face. And it's like, yeah, this shit, it's awful, but it's also funny. And I'm not going to flatten my humanity just because America is trying to flatten me.
Right. Yeah, and I think, when you say that, it's like, it's like, it's finding a lot of the joy within this mess, that story, is a lot about sexism, and it starts with an absurdity. The idea that somehow your gender, makes you unfit to do this job, which, and it's like it's like a lot. We talk this and we buy this and we run with it, and I wanted to start with, this is an absurdity, and and spin it out, and think about all the other absurdities that are connected with that. And I think that's a lot of what I do, and it's like, finding that a lot of times it's finding that joy within the pain, within the, if there is struggle or if there is trauma, like I think about like Kiese is Heavy, which is a dark, deals with a lot of dark stuff. It's also hilarious. And I felt like a lot of the white critics missed that. And they didn't understand. They didn't understand, even praising it. They didn't understand that he was writing a lot about the joy that's connected with the hardships. That it's not all hardships. That it's that is life, which ultimately means that we're gonna laugh.
It's that Black abundance.
Yeah.
And with Kiese and with Heavy, and I did a thing with him a couple weeks ago, and I remember bringing that up. It's like, if you were just to read, and Heavy has gotten all types of awards, and as you have, all types of awards and recognitions and whatever, but you just don't see that many, that many references to the humor in it.
Right.
Because it's not a book that is like, okay, this is a humor book. And so there's not going to be humor. And I think, again, that goes back to the flattening, where not just America in general, but most times, white critics do that too, where okay, this is a race book, this is a serious book. And so when I write my critique, when I give my critique, I'm gonna laud it, but I'm going to place it I'm going to compartmentalize and place it in this black bubble, or in this race bubble, or in this trauma bubble, and not even think about, or not even, and this is something that I've thought about too. Is it that they're ignoring the humor, or is it that I said, is it that they are ignoring the humor, or is it that they just don't see it? Because that could be another thing, where the jokes in your work, in Kiese's work, in my work, exists at a frequency that maybe only we're picking up on. And the humor isn't necessarily being ignored. It's just going completely over heads.
Yeah, I feel like with our books that, from what I've seen, people seem to not so much ignore it, not necessarily know what to do with it, because it's side by side with a lot of stuff. I feel like it's with some other books it's completely ignored, because they're in the category this is a serious book. I think what we do is what we're doing, it's so in your face, right? I think we use humor in a serious way that it's aggressive, and it's you really can't ignore it. But then it's side by side with at least in your work, it's side by side with these incredible insights and this incredible vulnerability, which you've recently said is not is not a confidence, or is not a bravery, which I'm going to disagree with. Even if you need it, even if it's like, I need a check. You revealed a lot, and I'm cringing. Like, I have this mask of fiction. It's like a lot of my stuff is on the page, but I could just be like, hey, it's a character, it's fiction. With you, it's not a character, and it's and I would just, and I guess sort of pivoting a little bit, how have people reacted to a lot of these vulnerabilities, people in your life, people that and and how you've portrayed them as well, on the page.
Well, before I even answer that, I'm going to push back on what you just said right there about how, I guess the nature of my work writing memoir allows me to be more vulnerable than you are, who writes fiction or writes short stories. And I disagree with that, because I think that when writing short story and writing fiction in the way that you do, or in the way that Nafisa does, or in the way that Nana Kwame does, we're getting into your head. Like, you're maybe you're not writing about experiences, although you are, but you're also creating these really absurd and bizarre and awkward situations. And so even if you're not giving us a vulnerability and an insight into your life, you're giving us an insight into your head.
Well, let me I wasn't saying that that allows you to be more vulnerable. I'm just saying, I agree with you. I think that, I'm just as vulnerable on the page, and I think Nafisa is just as vulnerable on the page. But there's a mask, there's a veil that I can pull down, and you can pull down that veil too. But I don't know if it's as easy.
Yeah, I mean, and to answer your question, everyone who's in my book, or at least people who, our book is told in a loose chronological order. And so the people who are still in my life, my parents, my friends, my wife, they all got a heads up that this chapter, that, hey, this book is happening. This is a passage that you're in. Take a look at it.
Your basketball partners as well?
Okay, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. That's different. Okay. So the black people in my life. Okay. First, I was like, hey, I plan on writing about this thing. How do you feel about that? then I actually went and wrote the thing. And then after I went and wrote the thing, I came back. It's like, you know what? This is the second draft. Here it is. Once you sign off on this, there's no going back. This is it. So how do you feel about this? And I got unanimous approval, where people were just like, yeah, just tell your story. Just, be yourself, whatever. And so yeah, I did get that. But it's easy. Like it's easy for people to come at me. It's gotten easier to have my work and my vulnerabilities and my person critiqued. The difficult part is, people knowing stuff about my dad, stuff about my wife, knowing stuff about my friends. And so to try to mitigate that a bit, I go at myself harder. I'm more critical of myself. I'm much more, conscious of my errors and places where I fucked up. And I hope, I hope that mitigates that a bit. It made me feel a little better about including, other people who are still close to me in my work. Now, as far as the basketball buddies, and for people who haven't read the book, I have an entire chapter devoted to this regular pickup basketball game that I play Thursday nights, and it's a mostly white group of guys. I'm not the only black guy, but again, I'd say it's 80-85% white guys who show up to this regular pickup game, and for people who play basketball, finding a good regular pickup game is like finding a diamond. Finding a diamond within a diamond. I mean, once you find a thing like that, it's precious. You preserve it. You don't give it up. You do whatever it takes to continue it, to cultivate it, protect it. And so I had this regular Thursday night game, but then early 2016, I learned that one of the guys is a pretty diehard Trump guy. And now, okay, if you're anywhere in America and you're doing a thing with white men, there is a great likelihood that at least a few of them are going to be Republicans, are going to be conservative. I mean, most white men in America are. Most of them. Mm-hmm. But this was different. And I have that knowledge playing with these guys. Like, okay, I know all these guys. Some of these guys maybe voted for Romney. Some of these guys maybe voted for Payne. But that Trump was different. Yeah. And the diehard support of Trump was different. Where even when, and it's not like we would have these conversations about politics all the time or ever, really. But sometimes, you over here, that guy, like, yeah, I was watching the Trump rally on TV the other day, and I would just catch those strays. And so the chapter is about the week of the election, Trump wins. I'm devastated, like millions of other people were. And I have this game, this Thursday night pickup, which I had never skipped. Like, there were times when my wife and I, still only had one car, and my wife had the car, so I caught like a jitney or an Uber to get, like, I wanted to play that badly. So there have been times like that. So this regular pickup game was that precious to me. But that week, I didn't want to be around any white people. Mm-hmm. Like, not cool white people, not ally white people, no white people at all, which is tough in Pittsburgh. Because Pittsburgh is white as fuck. Pittsburgh, as I say in my book, Pittsburgh is so white that Rick James probably tried to snort it once in the 70s. And so I had a dilemma. It's like, do I attend this game, which for years have been my weekly source of catharsis, of self-care, of even, finding a source of creative energy, or do I skip it because I know this Trump guy is there, and I know that other white guys are there, and I don't know what I would do in that circumstance. So I end up going to the game. I end up attending. And to make matters worse, the Trump guy is actually one of my favorite guys to play with too, because he plays a sort of game where he's really unselfish. He makes the right pass. He's a great defensive player. He's the sort of guy that you like to play with. And so he has this I don't know, this persona on the court, being unselfish, being like team-minded, being just a great guy that you want to have in the trenches with you, but off the court, he supports this maniac, this racist idiot, nincompoop. And so the chapter kind of deals with just that dichotomy. And I also give like these scouting reports on some of the regulars. I go really deep. If you're not a basketball person, this is a tough chapter because I get really, really deep in the basketball.
No, it's entertaining though. I'm not a basketball person, but it was good. It was entertaining. And I was like, wow. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I did not let those guys know about that chapter. And a couple of those guys I'm not like great friends with, but I'm pretty cool with. I've known them since we played against each other in high school. In fact, they're the ones who invited me to start coming to the pickup game, and I didn't give anyone from that game a heads up about the chapter. I just wrote it, and then once the book was published, it existed. And pre-COVID, I did start going back there, start playing back there. And it's funny because 2019, when the book was out, I was on tour. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't home. I just wasn't able to, once the book was out, I wasn't able to be home and play pickup ball. And so finally months, like my book came out in March. And so we're talking like September, October. I finally am home and I'm available on a Thursday night to attend one of these games. So I go and I'm thinking, okay, I know some of these guys have read it. Okay. How are they going to, let's see, how's it going to be? And they were cool about it. They would joke with me. I used pseudonyms in the chapter, but people who knew the guys knew who I was talking about. And so they would refer to themselves as a pseudonym. They would say certain parts of the scout report were off. But the Trump guy, who still goes, he has never talked to me about the book. But one of the guys who's a regular was like, you know what? I think you were actually too kind to him in the book.
Wow.
I think you let him off the hook of that. I think you were too kind because we give him a lot of shit about this shit too, and you could have gone harder.
I mean, you afford him some grace, and then there's the liberal guy, and they hug at the end, and to them it's a friendly competition where it's us, it could be life or death. And I wasn't sure how to feel about that at the end because it's kind of like I wouldn't know what to do. You had to make that decision. I didn't. At the time, I taught at a black college. I lived in a terrible neighborhood. It's all I could afford. And a lot of times I'd be frustrated that that I was in that financial state that I had to live in that neighborhood. And I lived in that neighborhood because for my son to go to the school he went to. But at the same time, at the day after the election, I took my son to the bus stop. I looked around and all the black people and Latinos that made up the neighborhood. And I was like, none of these people voted for Trump, and at that moment, I felt very, very comfortable being in this bad neighborhood.
And and in that week and in that moment, I never had a greater appreciation for what I do for a living. Just in terms of I don't any engagement with white people would be voluntary for me. Mm-hmm. Like I could just stay in the house all day. Now that wouldn't be fun to do, but I could have done that, you know. And I'm thinking about the Black people who also experienced that week the same way we did, but who may have had to go to their corporate job
Mm-hmm.
at the or at the company or whatever, where they're surrounded by white people, white superiors, white people who they know voted a certain way, and they have to go to work that day. They have to be around those people for the rest of the week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that, like, holy shit! Like, how do you manage that when you don't even have that space to be able to kind of remove or that privilege to be able to
Right.
like, you know,
You gotta call him Black.
yeah, you gotta call him.
Call him. I'm black today. Can't come to work.
Oh man. I guess this will be edited because I want to ask, how long do you want to? Because we've been going for about an hour.
I want to ask you, before we cut off, I want to ask you about your So you how do you feel about the time?
I'm good.
Feel about is the essay about your mother. I recently lost my mother just a little over a year ago, and someone you can imagine it's pretty devastating thing to happen, even though it's going to happen one day. That, to me, that was the essay that moved me the most. Brought me to tears towards the end of the essay. And I just appreciate a lot of the insights about the burdens that you wrote about, that your mother carried. And it's a beautiful elegy. I don't even really know if I have a question. But or I could finish by saying just talk about the construction of that essay.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and my condolences about your mom. I mean, a year ago, that's still pretty recent. Still pretty, it's been 7 years now for me. So it does, my mom, it was 2013 when she passed. And it does it gets better in some ways. But then there's other times when I'll have like this accomplishment that I wish I was able to witness her witness.
Mm-hmm.
Like she hasn't. No, I'll never be able to watch her interact with my children.
Yeah.
She just never met my children. Well, now if you believe in afterlife, and I do, then my mom is watching. Is around, is watching, but I don't get to see that. I don't get to see her watching. And I miss that. But yeah, the chapter about my mom, so the book, the original title of the book was Nigga Neurosis. Right? And that's like a term I coined a few years ago to encapsulate the state of being, where you are questioning how race impacted your treatment. Okay. So it could be, and it's a spectrum of behavior. It could be something like you're at like a breakfast spot eating pancakes, and the server comes over and asks if you want hot sauce, and it's like, hot sauce on pancakes? Really? Were they?
Who do you think I am?
So there's something like that. You're like, yeah, this is that. Are you asking me about hot sauce because I'm black? And you just listen to Beyonce. So there's that. So yeah, the concept of nigga neurosis, which talks about just this spectrum of behavior, where you're wondering, how your race may have impacted your treatment. And the example I gave about the pancakes and the hot sauce is like, what the fuck? Does anyone eat pancakes with hot sauce? Does that even happen? And then, in December or January, whenever the latest Star Wars movie came out, My wife and I went on a double date to go see the movie, and it was day one, so it was packed or whatever, and we had to get assigned seats in the theater. So we get our tickets, we go in the theater, we sit down, and it's mostly white. I'd say there are 250 people there. Of the 250 people there are probably 20 Black people. All right, and we get our seats in the front, and then right during the previews, one of the theater people comes and asks us if we're in the right seats.
Oh, wow.
And of course, our reaction is like, oh, okay, you're only asking us because we're Black, because holy shit, we're in the wrong seats. And then we were, we sat in the wrong seats, and the people that were next to us were in our seats, so we had to switch. And again, that was a circumstance where we assumed that, okay, yeah, full theater, you pinpoint the only Black people in here to ask if we're in the wrong seats, but we actually were in the wrong seats. So there's that. But then there's also you're driving, and you look in the rearview mirror and you see a police car back there, and you don't know. Maybe the cop is just following you, just happens to be behind you. Maybe you just happen to be on the same street. He just happens to be behind you. Maybe he is following you. And then it's like, okay, is he following me because I'm Black? Is he following me because I didn't turn on my turn signal, or I don't know, I was speeding or something? But is he following me because I'm Black is a part of that equation. Or you're just wondering, okay, what's about to happen? Because if that is true, if he is following me because I'm Black, what happens if he stops me?
Mm-hmm.
And so that concept of nigger neurosis, it's a recurring theme throughout the book. And the chapter with my mom really, I guess, puts a human face on it, because my mom died of lung cancer in 2013. And she had been diagnosed a year earlier with stage 4. But in the years before she passed, she had spent so much time in doctor's offices, emergency rooms, seeing specialists and her PCP, and they would tell her, she needs to get more exercise, she needs to drink more water, drink less pop, and all of those are great things to tell anyone, really. But I do wonder, even now, 7 years later, if my mom's race impacted how seriously they treated her. Now, once she was diagnosed, she got top-notch treatment from that moment on.
Mm-hmm.
Before she was diagnosed, if my mom were a white woman, a 6-year-old white woman, would they have done a test? Would they have ordered, taken her to see a specialist, or done a test that they didn't, have her take? And these are the sort of questions that again, still 7 years later, exist in my head, and they don't exist without context, because we know the history of medicine and how medicine has treated Black Americans. We know that Black female slaves were experimented on, and that many discoveries in gynecology happened specifically because of that.
Torture, basically.
Yeah, torture. They were tortured, with no anesthesia. We know that even today, that there are doctors who believe that Black people have a supernatural tolerance for pain. Okay, where they might not be, you think of racism, or white people sometimes think of racism and think of, Klan, think nigger, think Nazi, but don't necessarily think of the doctor who is quote unquote progressive, quote unquote liberal, but still believes that we are stronger inherently and that we could take more. And so all of that comes to a head, comes to like a bit of a culmination with the chapter about my mom. And that's why, I wrote about it because, it was a very, important detail, experience in my life, but also because it fit this narrative of America killing us, basically.
The other thing about that essay is that there's a remarkable act of empathy, and you start thinking about her life as a woman and how that affected her responsibilities as a wife, as a mother, and just as a woman, and these things that you'll never know. I mean, that adds like a gender neuroses as well, to the whole essay, it's a different story than the story of my mother, but I felt it. I felt it there. It was it's a remarkable act of empathy.
Well, thank you. And the gender neurosis part is something that is new to me, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And new, I don't mean like yesterday, but I mean within the last 4 or 5 years, in terms of just being able to step outside myself and recognize that, you know what, yes, we Black men, get this shit badly, get this shit terribly, but Black women get the racism too, with the misogyny, sexism, with the sexual violence, with the domestic violence also.
And we don't always have empathy.
Yeah, and
the support.
That's a part of it that I had to develop. That's a part of it that just didn't, I think that my activism or my thoughts about race, about racism were very self-contained, and they still are. I mean, they still are to a point. I mean, I'm not going to completely absolve myself, from those thoughts or from those feelings, because those remnants of that are still within me. And it takes work to empathy takes work. It does, particularly when you are a vulnerable person. I think, and I think that sometimes you could have a tendency to think that your vulnerability is singular, and that you are, it becomes almost like this egoist thing where, okay, if I'm getting this, then that means that I'm getting it the worst. And that is just not true. And it's not just a thing where people are saying that. It's not just a feeling based, this isn't true. No, that there are actual statistics, there's actual data that proves that this is not true. There's actual fields of study that will tell you that this is not true at all. Yeah. I'm meaning to ask you, how did you come, like, the world does not deserve, like, the world does not require you. What does that title mean? Like, how did you come to that?
Yeah, I think how I came to that was I was listening to NPR one day. It was Weekend Edition, and I wish I could find the interview, but I'll never find it. There was a musician on. I don't listen to that type of music, so I don't. I was more interested in it just because it was an interesting interview. He had apparently been part of a band, and so it comes to the end of the interview, and the interviewer is kind of like, I feel like she was asking a question that she wanted to ask for the entire interview, almost like she wasn't really listening to anything, just wait to get to that moment where she could say, "So when are you getting back with your band?" He becomes quiet for a little bit, then he's like, it's just not, the world doesn't require that. That's just not something the world needs. So, and it's kind of like, I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And I started thinking about that. I started thinking about, my focus was on music at that moment. I started thinking, Outkast is making terrible music. I think Idlewild had just come out. Outkast is making terrible music right now. But if they never make another good album, then and they haven't made an album since. But if they never made another good album, what they had is good enough. If Wu-Tang never made another good album, what they had is enough. Then I started extrapolating it out, and I started thinking, Stevie Wonder, Bob Marley, they are important to my life, right? To a lot of people's lives. If they never existed, we wouldn't know. And then I started thinking about all kinds of other things. And I was thinking that each individual one of us is not essential. And we have to sort of think about ourselves as part of a continuum, and it's sort of a freeing notion that we're not the most important thing, and we're the most important thing going in ourselves. If you have a pain, everything stops. But it's not that. But the world doesn't stop. The world keeps going, and I think that to me it's a freeing notion to really think about that. To really think of yourself as just one tiny blade of grass and not the lawn.
Yeah, and it connects back to the concept of empathy, because once you're able to realize that, what, I'm just a part of this tapestry.
Right.
I'm not the picture. I'm then I think that does help, enable or allow you to consider people who exist outside of you, who exist outside of your experience, who exist outside of your sensibility, and be able to be like, what, yeah, just because a thing is good for me, or just because a thing is bad for me, doesn't mean it would be good or bad for someone else.
There's a moment in the book where one of the characters is having a lap dance and it becomes like a psychedelic experience, and he hears a voice that tells him, "You're the most important person that ever existed, but everybody else is also the most important person that ever existed." And I think that's kind of the essence of not the essence of the book, but one of the essences of the book.
Yeah, the psychology behind that and that sort of psychedelic experience, I think I've been reluctant to admit this out loud, but since you went there first, I will. Is that none of us have really any evidence that the world exists outside of us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, we have belief that it does, but for all I know, the world could end as soon as I close. Like when I go to sleep and close my eyes, that's it. That the world, that everything that exists is completely self-contained. It's completely contained within me. And you can say, and you can probably say the same thing, because you don't know what. You're told what existed before you existed, and you assume that existence will continue when you're gone.
Right.
You are not. I mean, there's no way of being completely 1,000% sure of that.
No.
Okay. And that puts us in the same position as like my 19-month-old son, where that's what he still believes, that the world revolves around him, that the world literally revolves around him. And we get older, and we get more context, and we get more experience and more education that tells us, oh, that's not true. But we have to trust that experience, that context, and that education, because again, when I close my eyes, if I close my eyes and close my ears, the world stops existing.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's and then how you treat other people, it becomes a choice. You could with that information, you could take that information and say, I can be as shitty to anybody as I want, because they don't really exist. And that might be a short life, but it's a choice you can make. But then you take that other information and say, on faith, I believe these other people actually do exist, and the world actually does exist. I've never been to China, but I'm assuming China exists. And and then it's a choice each and every one of us has to make every single moment because like you said, there's no guarantee of anything. There's no way you can actually guarantee and prove it, so you have to really act on faith.
Yeah, you have to act on faith. You have to believe, and again, that faith and that belief, in other people, in the possibility of other possibilities. That's where that empathy happens. And I think, I keep coming back to this concept of empathy because that's where the best work comes from. Like I think that the best work, that your work, and we're talk about KSA, even like Samantha Irby, Monty Perry, Brittany Cooper. I mean, I'm thinking of just people I know who are just writing this tremendous work right now, Bossy Ekby, and it comes from empathy. It comes from trying to find that grace for themselves, right? And also recognizing that there's an entire world that exists outside of you. Like you can't, I don't even know how you can work, how you can write without that recognition, and there are people who do that. I mean, fucking Donald Trump's sons have books, but you can't write a good book without being deeply empathetic, or at least without making the effort. And perhaps the book is about the effort, but an empathy has to be a part of it in some capacity.
I think that comes back to what you said earlier about criticizing yourself, being more critical of yourself than anyone else, right? Because you really have to think about, how you have harmed other people in these situations, and how you, your role in things. You got your essays about how you and your wife got together. And I think you're incredibly critical of certain things. I don't want to give it away for the reader, but it's an act of empathy to say that I fucked up in this situation, but I'm gonna continue, but this is how I have to move forward even though I fucked up.
I mean, it's an act of empathy, yeah, but I'm going to be a little bit more cynical too, just about myself, because it's a sincere act of empathy, but it also makes for a more compelling read. it also, like, the functionality part of it matters. And I ask myself, would I be as empathetic? Would I be as vulnerable if there wasn't a tangible validation in it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, I want to be a better person, obviously, but do I still have that same compulsion to be a better person if I also didn't know that being a better person was going to make me a better writer too? Because I don't think, we're incentive driven entities, humans are, and so what is my incentive for being vulnerable, for examining this way, for developing empathy, and I want to tell myself that, oh yeah, I'm just doing this because it's the right thing, and I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. But I can't go this far, then just stop right there. It's like, okay, if I'm going to really try to be as self-aware and as vulnerable as I can be, then I need to go a little bit further. It's like, okay, why does this empathy exist? And the piece that I wrote recently that you referenced, the VSB piece about I'm Not Brave, kind of touches on that.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not a coincidence that my work has gotten progressively more vulnerable, more transparent, and all of that as I've gotten more success. And all these other, physical and metaphysical validations that exist. And I feel like, okay, Brave is writing the same way when I am 26 and still, and still have like, my income is very tenuous. My living situation is tenuous. My dating life is awkward and weird. And so if I were to write with that vulnerability and exist and live with that vulnerability, then instead of still performing this, hyper hetero masculinity that I thought was necessary to project to the world, that would have been brave. That would have been more brave. But now it's like, well, yeah, I'm 40, I'm a dad, I'm a husband. 41, I'm a dad, I'm a husband. I get paid good money to write and to create and to be vulnerable. So yeah, I have these incentives that exist now. And so is it still brave to do that when you have an actual tangible reason why you're doing it?
Yeah, I mean, and it would take a lot longer than we have to unpack that. To think through it. But I can think of a lot of people. Kanye West is one example. Through success, it seems to have made him less connected, less empathetic in many ways. And you go on Twitter, there is often an incentive there to be less empathetic. And a lot of people have gotten real world gains out of that. So to defend Damon Young, I would say that you're still making a choice to go in that direction of becoming a better person. Whereas there are incentives in other parts of the world. Or we can look at the president as an extreme example. A lack of empathy has gotten him vocal support in some sectors.
Well, and that ties back to the concept of incentive, because throughout his life, he's always had his incentive to continue to be the person that he is, where it's been reinforced. It was reinforced by his dad. It was reinforced by people around him, his family, and then reinforced by the people who, when he became, successful or whatever, wanted to be around him. And so he's never been like disincentivized, to be anything other than what he is today. And for, incentive works differently for a 70-year-old, privileged white man than it does for a 40-year-old black, 40-year-old nigga from the hood. And it's all right. It's pivot, and this will take a bit longer, so I'm just going to touch on this a little bit here. I have a theory about Kanye.
Okay.
I want to save for a book right now, but I've been working through this, and so all right, I had been a member, a resident, a landowner on Kanye Island for forever. Like when people talk, make this distinction between the old Kanye and the new Kanye, and I guess new Kanye started after 808s when people make the distinction with his music. Thinking, college dropout, graduation, late registration, that's the old Kanye.
Wait. Oh, when is the Dark Twisted? So Dark Twisted Fantasy is the new Kanye?
I think when people think of the new Kanye, they consider 808s the start of the new Kanye.
Okay.
When this conversation happens in people's heads or online or out loud about the new Kanye, the old Kanye, and I think that his best work I think new Kanye has created his best work because I think My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is one of the top 5 hip hop albums that's ever been created, and
it's a work of genius.
Yeah, and I love Yeezus.
I say that very reluctantly because I'm not on Kanye either.
Yeah, and I love Yeezus. And so, but the thing, so just getting back to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, when people talk about, Kanye is broken right now. Okay, he is. Like his head, his actions, he's having these mental health issues, but he also has this anti-blackness that is existing within him, and all of these things are connecting, and he's also making more money now than he ever has because of his clothes. So this is just a very volatile and very dangerous concoction that is happening right now. And so people are talking about like the shift in Kanye, like, okay, what quote unquote broke him? They refer to his mom passing and that kind of decentering him. Sometimes people refer to Kim Kardashian's influence on him, which is some bullshit, really, because if anything, I don't want to be up here defending Kim Kardashian, but she seems to have, I don't know, been a positive influence on him. It's a really weird thing to say out loud, but I think the thing that turned Kanye was My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and chasing white validation from that, because I think remember he had the video, he had the movie for that. He came out with a 35-minute long movie. It's still on YouTube. Kind of Monthly's Lemonade and all of that, where he had a movie, and I think he expected this album to be his Thriller. Yeah, to be the album that doesn't just get critical lauds, but is an essential part of the culture of the zeitgeist from that moment forward. And it's still acknowledged critically as a great album. It still won some Grammys. And I think he still sold, 2 or 3 million copies of it. But 2 or 3 million copies is not 20 million.
It's not, yeah.
And he didn't win the big Grammys, like Record of the Year, Album of the Year, Song of the Year. Like the biggies. He didn't win any of those. And I think that chasing that sort of validation did a thing to him.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think there's. I don't know.
It's a theory. I'll say it's a theory that I am still workshopping in my head.
There's something to that in that it came to a point where he decided that as Malcolm X would say, the white man's ice is colder. And there was a point where he started using the white voice in the interviews. That was so bizarre. And he started openly begging white billionaires, to invest in his stuff. And it was kind of like I think Kiese may have an essay about this, or I'm not sure, but there was someone who had an essay about him chasing this white validation, and it just became, to me, it became very, very sad up to that point where it's kind of like you're sort of discounting a lot of what brought him here, in the colloquial. You forgot where he came from. You started discounting that, the culture that he is a part of to try to chase that ring. And at this turn, at this juncture, there was a point where I was very, I was just like, fuck Kanye. But I do think that that particular mental illness that he says he suffers from has the reputation of turning it almost I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but it turning almost like installing a new system within you. Whereas you see people suffering from this, and they're saying things that they wouldn't say. And you don't, it's hard for me to say, what is where that begins, where Kanye begins, and this problem is this mental illness is sort of taking over. So I've tried to recede from outward criticisms, and there's a certain point where I was like, there's anti-blackness and there's mental illness, and they're not connected. But I think that's a little too simplistic. I think that there's I think that his outward anti-blackness is weaved in with this mental illness, and we have to approach it with empathy, and not laughter, and sort of ignore it, and sort of almost ignore it, and hopefully he gets the help that he needs. Yeah, I mean, I think that album, and I bailed off Kanye Island after college dropout. I just couldn't do it anymore.
So you weren't there so you weren't there at all, basically.
I went back and listened to these albums.
You left after college dropout.
I went back and listened to these albums. 808 and Heartbreaks is one of my favorite albums right now. I listen to it a lot. Dark Twisted Fantasy is a work of genius, and what you say is true. It's true that it's a work of genius, and it's true that I think that he thought that this was going to get him the thrill of validation. To me, it's not an album that you listen to every day. It's an album you admire rather than an album you live. Like Thriller and Off the Wall, you live those albums. You admire Dark Twisted Fantasy.
And I think that gets to the point about just the danger of chasing that white validation, that mainstream validation, because then you create work that is inherently self-conscious. Not all work is self-conscious to a point, but but when you are chasing that validation, and that is your only audience, or the most important audience, you're creating a work that is self-consciously concerned with how it'll be perceived by white people, and that is just an insufficient way of creating things. You create a thing that is meant to be awarded, meant to be admired, but not meant to be felt.
Wow. Yeah.
And there are some songs on Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy that I do return to, like Hell of a Life. I return to that a lot, but yeah, as far as the album totality, it is an album that is very self-consciously award me. Look at all that. I'm putting Daft Punk and Rihanna on the same track. Look at this. Don't you see what I'm doing with this? And Rick, I'm putting Daft Punk, Rihanna, Rick Ross, and Drake and Elton John on the same track, and then Chris Rock. Okay, yeah. And so yeah, that I think yes, the conversation about Kanye's anti-blackness cannot exist without an accompanying conversation about mental illness. And there are people who are more equipped to have that conversation than I am. Like Basi Akbi has written beautifully about bipolar disorder. Danielle Belton, who's the EIC at the Root, has also written about her, dealing with being bipolar, and also written about Kanye and the connection to that. But aside from that, I just think that he is a cautionary tale of what happens when Black people chase white validation.
Yeah.
And your work might be awarded, your work might be lauded, but your work may also not be as robust as it could possibly be. And then it's like a dog chasing a tail. There's always going to be another thing. There's always going to be another level of this validation that you're going to be trying to reach and trying to get, and you're just never going to get. So you'll never you'll never be satisfied.
Yeah. Last thing. Nigga Neurosis. Whose idea was it to change the title?
It was a collective idea. It was it came. So I sold a book with that title. My agent loved it. My editor Denise Oswald and my agent Tanya McKinnon. They both loved it. Denise is white, and she's my editor at Echo. But I guess Denise spoke to her people at Barnes and Noble and her people at Amazon and all the major booksellers who were like, yeah, we can't wait for Damon's book. We're excited to have it. We're excited to promote it. But yeah, about that title, I don't know how banner ads with nigga in 72.1.
In the 70s, there were movies with that title all over Times Square.
I don't know. I don't know that's gonna look. So, and she was like, if you want to keep it, you can, but I'm just letting you know. And so I made a decision to change it to something. And I think that What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker is a more fitting title. And that came to me while I was doing some edits. I
agree. I think it's a better title.
Yeah, and there was, I have to admit,
not just for marketability. Not just for marketability. I think it fits the book better.
There was also a bit of a trollishness with me choosing Nigga Neurosis because I always had this fantasy in my head of like white people struggling with it and me being entertained by it. Like it was always like I would be on like CNN and like Anderson Cooper is like, so your book Ninja? Can I say ninja? Ninja Neurosis. Can you tell me about your N-word? I had that fantasy in my head. I wanted to recreate that. So it was that title was a bit of a troll.
I have a story in my book called The Nigga Knockers, and that happens a lot. And it entertains me.
I'm entertained by how white people engage with that word. I am when white people are trying to figure out how to say it, and I'm not giving it. And I'm not going to give you any help. You're just going to. I'm just going to sit here and let you figure it out on your own how to say this. So go ahead. Oh man, but we got a chance to meet last year at the the Miami Book Fest. Got a chance to hang out.
You bought me tacos, man. Thanks.
I bought you tacos.
You pay for them, and then you pay for them, and you refuse the money I was trying to give you. So I was like, all right, this is my man, it's my nigga now.
Okay, thank you. I think we had all had a few drinks, so I don't. I don't remember the tacos, but it was great. Good. I hopefully whenever this ends, we're able. Like I wanted, I actually wanted to bring you to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a plan to bring you to Pittsburgh. I was going to do a Black Book Fest here. And
nice.
It was going to be me. Do you know Disha Filial?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was me, it's Disha, and Tony Norman.
The book is incredible.
Yeah. Disha's incredible. So me,
Equalizer Church Lady. Yeah.
Me, and Tony Norman, who's a columnist at the Pittsburgh Post Gazette, and come together to do this Black Book Fest, and we were going to call it the Black Lit Fan Fest. And we were just going to invite. We had like a list of names of like 25 to 30 names of people we wanted for sure to be at, and we were going to have panels and talks, and it was going to be like a 2-day event at the August Wilson Center downtown. And you were one of the people that we were like, we whatever it costs to get you here, we will do that. So
I would have been there, and I would have been on. I would have tried to. I would have been on Wiley Avenue looking for Aunt Esther's house. I'm an August Wilson fanatic.
And so whenever all this ends, just just know that that's coming. And
all right, I'm there.
Okay.
I'm there. Great talking to you, bro.
Yeah, same. Stay safe. Stay socially distant.
Mask up.
Mask up. All that. All right.
All right, peace.